That many people here. CIRES is actually not a department, it's a research institute. We actually are 42 years since we were founded as a wave propagation lab, also a laboratory, more like a research unit to look at wave propagation in the atmosphere. It has evolved, as you will see, into a very diverse environmental science research unit, and we are a cooperative institute. That also means we cooperate with our partners across the Broadway, which is NOAA. That is shown in the next picture. Our mission statement is, shortly, we do interdisciplinary research, education and outreach in environmental sciences. And that's very broad, and that's where our breath comes from the unit. We are a cooperative institute with NOAA, with the Earth System Research Lab across Broadway, where we actually have 45% of our research faculty working in the government labs, but they are all university employees. What is the scope of CIRES? CIRES is so broad, I will only give you a very few examples. It's much broader than this, but we are only given 10 minutes. Climate research, we do a lot of satellite analysis, for example, from the ice sheets, from glaciers, for the sea ice. There's the Earth crust research we have in the geoscience group, earthquake prediction, for example. Atmospheric chemistry, we just heard that we are trying to build #1 group together with the chemistry department in this new field. It includes the measurements of pollution, for example. Ecosystem is a new path in CIRES. It's growing fast, and we actually look at the response of the forest and the CO2 in the atmosphere. Water has always been an issue, and we are very strong in the water research together with our NOAA group, Water in the West, evolving, and we are trying to actually bring a very big proposal, research here to Boulder that looks not only at Colorado, looks at the entire western region of the US. Aquatic ecosystem, the human influence on water quality, for example. Human health, a new way. Bob Seves is leading this effort. He actually is very innovative to look at inexpensive inhaling vaccination. And I am not going to list all our awards. Given our close to 600 researchers in CIRES, we have too many awards, but I want to point out there is a reception, for example, next Thursday. Please come along to honor Bob Seves for his special award, 5:30, and we have good food and good drinks, as usual. Science policy, a new way. Susan Avery actually implemented this. We are doing analysis of policy research. We are not doing the research, not the policy itself, but the research on the policy. We have 105 grad students in CIRES, supervised by CIRES researchers, supported by CIRES. You can see 2 of them we are sending off in very remote regions. We are sending them off here around Antarctica on an ice floe. The good news is we got them all back. They always come back, and we take actually very serious to communicate with our policymaker. In the lower picture, you see Nancy Pelosi reading actually the CIRES research outline here, and then Ed Markey. We had their attention for 4 hours because we locked them in our research tent on the Greenland ice sheet. CIRES, as I mentioned, over 550 people. You can see how it's divided. I'm actually very proud. We run the whole institute on only 4% on administrative staff. All the rest is actually supported through grad student. We have grad student 105. We also support undergrad student, associate researchers, and researchers. We have 22 faculty lines in grad school in 11 different departments. So it's actually unique, and for me it is a pleasure to work with that many department chairs. It works very well. We have every year a breakfast, once a semester usually, and interesting, basically all the department chairs show up for a discussion. Where do we want to go in the future? Where we actually want to co-hire, because we have to actually be in sync with the needs from the departments. And that makes our standing very unique to do this interdisciplinary research, not only in arts and science, it is also in engineering. So it goes across the different colleges. 11, we have not really grown in the past. I do the same play. To actually keep up the good research, we need good grad students. Grad students comes through faculty, and I think that is a very important link, and I'm glad we have the deans here. Location, location, location. Here it is. We are at 3 different locations. About half of Ceres is at the David Skagg Research Lab. This is a federal institution. We have 250 people working over there. Main campus, and then we have on East Campus a very large unit. We also rent a villa at the University Hill, so we are moving out and be innovative to actually get more space. But you will see on my last slide, space is an issue. If we want to grow, and we are growing annually at the rate of 5 to 6%, by research money and by personnel, we are outgrowing some of the locations, and I'm glad that we have several committees already put in place to discuss space on campus. The funding, I think, is very important for research units. Our funding is above $50 million. $25 million comes from the NOAA directly for our cooperative agreement. This is a 5-year ongoing contract. We have to rebid actually next year for our own research unit, and it's very diverse. As you can see, it spans through NASA, NSF, and several other units. The University of Colorado, this is actually our grad student faculty salaries. We don't really get any money back directly from the university, other than our DICR. Research partnership is important when you build a big research unit. We have obviously very strong partnership with Israel across the Broadway, with another cooperative institute, which is a NOAA unit at CSU, CIRA, doing atmospheric research. With NCAR, we have good collaborations due to the modeling. We are actually developing right now a new Earth system model, and Ceres will be responsible for a cryospheric component on a new Earth system model. We work together with Israel and with NCAR. PEOS I mentioned and singled out because we have ongoing hires. We have joint ties on there, and we have a lot of grad students that we are sharing together. InStar is very important since we are working in similar matching fields. Paleoclimate is one example, and there is a good collaboration on several levels there. And other centers within the university, like Natural Hazard Center, IBS, and the National Research Law Center. Facilities. As was mentioned before, we couldn't do our research without our facilities, and we have our own electronic and hardware workshop that is shown here. We developed, for example, the ozone sonde in this workshop, as I remember, and most or all ozone measurements today made by the balloons come out of that workshop. So they are offspring companies that were developed, several of them. I can't go in detail, but I do remember we have about 6 or 7 different companies that were actually created after Ceres. We have research tools, not only paragliders, but very complicated labs. Very good computer support. This is not a joke. They can fix everything. Most of our labs depend on high computing powers, and therefore we have a very good support. I also want to mention the centers we have. We have National Snow and Ice Data Center within Ceres, and whatever you read about CI, CISDK, all these measurements are actually done here at CU. They produce the daily satellite analysis and then collaborate with NASA to put it out. I have only 2 more slides. One is the research we are doing, which is quite wide-ranging. For example, the prediction and the impact of El Niño is a research done within Ceres together with NOAA. The air quality measurements, the quality measurements of the water is a major research track. The research on drought and wildfires, that becomes very important here in a drying climate when we have a warmer or a climate warming. Earthquake risk and prediction, including tsunami. All tsunami measurements and forecast is done within Ceres. A new way identifying microbial pathways to degrade environmental pollutants, potential impact for climate change, and documenting the shrinking of the cryosphere, that means glaciers, ice, and sea ice, and also providing risk assessment tools to improve the decision making. What are the future challenges? My last slide, and like everybody else on this podium, we talk about space. I think space is a limiting factor. So far we were lucky because we could actually move within space or move people around, but to have a very successful research unit, you have to be at least a certain critical amount of researchers at the same location. And therefore I hope the future space plan take that into account, that we can build research buildings where we can go and rent 1 floor, 2 floors. So we don't just think about our own buildings, but I think we should develop some means that we have research labs that we can share across different units. I also raise it, even though might be the wrong place here, the administrative load imposed at the university through the state and federal regulations has increased a lot. If you have seen that over the last 10 years, it became a bit better. I'm still worried that we get too much admin duties we have to fulfill to move on. So I would like to have some discussions on that also in this review. Our accountability is good, like this review, and actually very pleased. This is the first time I was able to sit in all these different lectures, but I also bring forward, we just had our PRP 2 years ago. What are the incentives? How can we move forward? How serious is it taken, what we actually discuss here, that we can combine it? More on the positive note, actually, Ceres is expanding activities for this new research center in energy. The fellows actually voted that we want to move forward and actually be a major part in the research part of the energy. Opportunities, Israel, NOAA is actually forming a new climate service. Climate service is equally large than the climate prediction and the weather forecast. This will be a major arm, there will be a major research need where CIRES can actually step in through the departments, the connections. And then we look forward for our new cooperative agreement that will start 2010-11 for the next 5 or 10 or 40 years. Thank you.
A discussion, we hope, that we can open up to the group and share some ideas having to do with various areas of hiring resources that are important to the physical and mathematical sciences, but also, as if you've taken a look at these questions, they're important pretty much campus-wide. And so this is a conversation that will affect the physical sciences and mathematics, but it also is going to affect every other unit that's sitting in this audience and then some. So for this, we have a number of people on the panel. The review group has invited Jim White, who is, it's very complicated. He's the director of INSTAR, Institute for Arctic and Alpine Research. He is also a professor in environmental studies and a professor in geological sciences. So he has fingers in lots and lots of pies. He's very familiar with the units undergoing review, but his unit is not undergoing review, so we thought he would be a perfect person to be the moderator for this panel discussion. So I will allow Jim to introduce the members of the panel and take it from there. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Sue. It is my pleasure to attempt to keep these folks in line. Let me first introduce the panel, and then I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to do here for the next hour and a half. Paul Beal, Professor, Chair of Physics, you heard from earlier. Sue Beatty, Associate Dean for Natural Sciences and Arts and Sciences. Bill Kempfer, Vice Provost. Mike Shull, who's the College Professor of Distinction in APS. John Stephenson, he's our token interim. We have a few of these around, but he's our token interim Dean of the Graduate School. And Maggie Tolbert, Professor, Chemistry, Biochemistry, and also in Ceres. What we're going to do is take a few minutes for two topics to be explored in some depth by Paul and Mike. Then we will have an opportunity for Maggie to respond to those, and then each of the other three panelists will have an opportunity to respond to anything that was said in that first 20 minutes or so, and that we hope will take up the first roughly half hour. That's going to leave plenty of time for question and answer. And when we get to that point, Andre's going to have a microphone in his hand and he will wander the aisles here. We would like you to use the microphones when it comes to Q&A, because this is being filmed and the sound is being recorded, and we won't be able to hear what you're saying if you don't use the microphone. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Beal to present the first question: how can the model for distributing new faculty positions seek to both build interdisciplinary strengths while also enhancing interdisciplinary goals?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, at the risk of pointing out the obvious, but if you can't point out the obvious at a program review kickoff meeting, where can you? Our key missions are providing an excellent educational experience for our undergraduates and our graduate students, conducting world-class teaching, research service and creative research scholarship and creative work, and provide an outstanding community and professional service. The people who primarily do this with the support of our staff are our faculty, and so our first and foremost goal every time we think about anything at a campus at a strategic level is how do you recruit, support, nurture, promote, and retain the most outstanding faculty you possibly can. Now, there's many issues that lead into that: faculty salaries, startup, quality laboratory space and office space, teaching space. Faculty are very interested in very world-class teaching space, and that needs to be part of the discussion. And of course, staff support, which is something that we've been chronically under-supported in at CU. So to talk about briefly about the models that CU uses for investing in new programs and in existing programs, there's several different paths that money flows at the university, and I'm going to mention 3 of them, and there's probably more that I'm not going to have a chance to talk about. One is the process that this is part of. It's the strategic planning with broad faculty involvement through program review, and the Provost Budget Committee, the Academic Affairs Budget Advisory Committee, sorts through requests from the deans and tries to make assessments as to where we should be investing new funds in the future. Now, that primarily is faculty lines, although there's some one-time money and some staff support and graduate student support sometimes goes into that. But it almost never discusses things like startup and space considerations that go along with new faculty lines. Another mechanism on the campus that leads to the new money invested into new project would be the initiatives. And the initiatives come from all sorts of places, from different faculty, but from much smaller groups of faculty typically. And invariably, each of them is a good idea, but the question is how is that coordinated with the more strategic planning that goes on the campus? And then finally, there's the investment in capital on the campus, and that follows through a completely different process. So capital investment, strategic investment in new buildings, those kinds of things are not part of either of those processes to a great extent, although the initiative process does contribute into the capital process. I'd say the strategic planning primarily has a much weaker input into capital construction. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the startups are a major problem. They've increased by a factor of 3 to 5 in physics in recent years. And those are funded by the department through its department allocated ICR stream and the College of Arts and Sciences. And when possible, the provost and the vice chancellor for research contribute funds as well. But it's getting to the point where a new faculty member could come in with something like $1 million startup package, and it would take them many years to actually bring in enough money to, in effect, pay back the department for that initial investment. $8 to $10 million of extramural funding would be required just to pay back, as it were, the department for this investment. Now, all along during that time, the faculty member needs to be supported by exactly that same stream of money with matching grants and equipment grants and staff support. So not all of the DA-ICR that comes back to the departments can actually end up being used for paying back, as it were, this loan. Now, we don't have a savings account we can draw from, and so particularly in a period of growth, and this university's been growing a lot lately, every time you're adding someone new, it requires you to draw from the ICR stream of a smaller size faculty, and so it's an unsustainable budgetary model, I think. Now, getting back to this question about investment in the disciplines versus interdisciplinary work, my opinion is largely in the laboratory, that's largely an artificial distinction. World-class people work in interdisciplinary collaborations that grew out of disciplinary science, and the interdisciplinary work they do results in pure science, even though they're doing in disciplinary advances that come out of interdisciplinary work. So the Department of Physics, for example, works with many of the institutes on campus and with the government labs in the area. And if you stop a scientist while they're in the lab and ask them, are you doing disciplinary work or interdisciplinary work, I think they would laugh at you. They're doing science, and how you label it is something that is a distinction for funding and for administrators, but in the laboratory I think that's somewhat artificial.
Thanks, Paul. We'll move on to our second presentation by Mike Shull. The question is, how should the campus address the resource and infrastructure needs that accompany hiring and retention in the sciences?
Okay, thanks. And I think Paul started that off pretty well. Before I talk, I wanted to also mention I'm glad we have 3 administrators who are also faculty, and they're in departments, so geography, economics, and English. So it's nice to have our colleagues here. I'm going to talk about infrastructure needs and faculty retention. I'd like to make a couple of points on why these are important. First, we spend an awful lot of time recruiting our faculty, almost a full year. We spend a lot of money recruiting them and also getting them startup packages. And in our department, we've been pretty lucky. We've held on to almost all our faculty, not all, but you really hate it when they leave, and they leave for another school. You've wasted your startup money, you're the farm team, and that's really inefficient. The second point that I think we're all seeing is that departments have a lot of critical needs, and we've heard in the 8 talks this afternoon that they all hit some of the same themes. Offices, office space, laboratories, startup packages, the general infrastructure of a department, from staff to special needs, fellowships, TAs, etc. And so how do we fund those when we have a state that doesn't really fund higher ed well enough, and it's decreasing? The third point, general point that affects, I think, everyone, not just sciences, physical sciences especially, though, is buildings. We've got, in the physical sciences, a 40 or 50-year-old infrastructure. Now, it's been renovated a little bit, but basically there hasn't been a major physical science building, at least among our group, on the main campus for 40 years. There has been Benson Geology, and that's a physical science, but not being reviewed this year. The LASP and GILA institutes have grown, and Ceres had an addition 15 years ago. But by and large, the departments have not grown, and we're all feeling that impact. So what do we do? I'm not going to propose a solution exactly, but I'm going to raise some issues. I think we've become increasingly reliant on this DA-ICR model. DA stands for Department Administration, ICR stands for Indirect Cost Recovery. But it's basically the overhead we get back to help us do the research from the grants. And you really don't want to spend it imprudently. You want to spend it on things that promote research. You don't want to get it encumbered other ways. So we have a model where 71% of that ICR goes to the university, 29% comes to the departments or institutes. A lot of that gets skimmed, and it gets skimmed for good things, buildings, et cetera, but decreasing the share is coming back to the department. So the 71-29 split is an issue. I think how much of the 71% and the 29% are encumbered, in other words, earmarked for things that we would just prefer not to have to do. We'd like the state to cover it, but the state doesn't cover it. So on the margin, we really don't have discretionary funds to do these startup packages, or we have very little. So really, what I'm drawn to on this issue is how to invest and focus these funds more efficiently, invest them so that they build our research infrastructure. I don't have the answer, but I think we have to think hard in our program review about the balance, the 71-29 balance, and also the balance between departments and institutes on doing the research. They both have that mission. The final issue that I'm going to raise, and I've told everyone why be boring, be provocative, and that is, I'm going to look Todd in the eye, and the dean of this enormous, wonderful College of Arts and Sciences with a great core curriculum and 40 units, but maybe it's gotten too big, and maybe we would be more efficient and we could have the time on task if we had separate units, separate College of Sciences, separate College of Humanities and Arts, separate College of Social Sciences. And I wouldn't do that if it harmed any of those units, and I think it takes a lot of looking into. But I actually have a theory that we all three would do better if you broke the pieces up and allowed them each to grow and thrive and do the fundraising and the advocacy with the state. So those are all issues that I'd like to throw out for discussion in the Q&A.
Thank you, Mike. Nothing provocative there. So next we're going to hear Maggie's thoughts. Maggie.
I'd like to I'd like to reiterate some of what Paul was saying in terms of the interdisciplinary research. I'm both in the chemistry department and in CIRES, and in both of these units, there's an extraordinary amount of interdisciplinary research. One of the things, actually, that Coney said that surprised me is in CIRES, we have 11 different departments represented. And we have meetings, every month, sometimes twice a month with these different fellows in all these departments. And when you have all these meetings with so many different people, you really start to get to know them and make connections and contacts. And it's really very strong. And so as we think about moving ahead and answering this question of how do we do and make interdisciplinary hires, I think one thing we want to be careful of is that we don't want to hurt the really amazing interdisciplinary programs that we have going on right now, both within the departments and within the institutes. And so as we think of these two models that Paul mentioned, the strategic planning one, where we, maybe the bottom-up approach, we don't want to interfere with that too much if it's all the initiative approach. Another thing that I was really excited about to hear today in this afternoon's presentations was what made me think that there could be actually a new model for how we do interdisciplinary hires. And in the old model, we do our strategic planning, we think about what we need to maintain our excellence or grow, and we have that idea in our unit, and then maybe the institute does the same thing in their unit. But what I saw today between Coney and Bruce's talks was that they've added a step to that, where they've done their strategic planning in their unit, and then they've crossed over to talk between the institute and the department. And so in the end, you have this strategic plan where both the units sort of have the same goal. And I think that it makes it a much stronger case to go forward with the interdisciplinary hires. So I hope that that's a model that we can, go forward with in the future. Another thing I just want to throw out here is that I think there's one particular challenge that we have in the group that is being reviewed in this round of the PRP, and that's mainly physical sciences. And that is that we have an extraordinarily small number of women faculty. When I just went through and looked at each of our units and added up all the numbers, and so I've seen many of your faces on the web in doing this, together our units have 15% women faculty in tenured and tenure track. So that seems alarmingly low. unfortunately, it's not that different than the national average. This isn't a unique problem to the University of Colorado in any way, but I would say that we're not doing any better than the nation as a whole. And I'd like it to be something that we could think about and try to figure out how we could do this. This ties into comments that Mike was making about retention. There's two parts, hiring and retention, and they're both important, and we don't want to be that farm team, either for men or women. So I hope we can work on that. And it's really important, I think, we all recognize when we have students that are 30 to 50% women, that we want to have some women role models as faculty. So I would love to hear any suggestions if anyone has anything to say on that.
Thank you, Maggie. Now we're going to give our other three panelists an opportunity to respond to any of this or to bring up any other issues they would like to bring up. And we'll do this from your right to left, if I've got that correct, and start with Sue.
I was trying to figure that out. Thank you. As I listen to all these comments, a lot of things are flying around in my head. I tried to make notes. I'm sure I won't remember everything that I was thinking about. I suspect Bill is thinking somewhat along the lines of space. And I suspect John is thinking somewhat along the lines of graduate support. So I think I might tackle the piece that was introduced having to do with faculty hiring and how we decide how to allocate new FTE and how we can build a good model for that with all the kinds of initiatives and strategic plans that units are going to be developing in this review process. Lots of things going on campus, and I think my plea would be that these things are as coordinated as they can be, rather than competing. That said, it's impossible for them not to compete. So when I think about interdisciplinary work, it occurs to me that this campus is very good at that. And part of the reason is because we have such strength in our basic disciplines. So disciplinary strategic plans and areas they wish to specialize in feed into, very naturally, interactions among different kinds of disciplines and subdisciplines. So part of our interdisciplinary strength draws from the strength in units. At the same time, as I think Bruce Eaton mentioned in his presentation, departments very often incorporate into their own strategic planning the kinds of needs and collaborations that might take place, for instance, with joint hiring with an institute. And I think over the years, this has actually developed very nicely, where at least the hires that I've been involved in since I've been in this position have been really nice, beautiful collaborations between institutes and departments to develop something, an area to search in that is actually serves both the institute and the department strategic plans and hiring. As opposed to, maybe several years ago, there might have been more of a complaint that departments were forced to hire somebody in an area just because an institute wanted it. I think we've actually made a lot of changes along those lines, and the process works very well. So I would argue that with the blossoming number of initiatives that we see coming up on campus, and initiatives are kind of amorphous things, right? They're not necessarily institutes or programs or units. They're initiatives. They're a collection of interest in a particular area that would like to expand and do hiring. I would argue that we really need to pay attention to two things. I think there is a limit to the total number of new initiatives that we can sustain profitably and logistically on campus and still do what we do, which we do well. So that's one part of it. The other part is that for those initiatives that do receive resources, I think the kind of model that we now have that works well between institutes and departments should follow through to these initiatives. And so I would just ask that as we go forward over the next year or two, that there be open conversations about where these initiatives might serve units, and by units I mean departments and institutes, and where the departments and institutes and their expertise can help inform where some of these initiatives might want to go.
Thank you, Sue. Continuing down your other right, or left, Vice Provost Bill Kempfer.
I hate being put on either the right or the left, so
you're in the center.
Yeah. And I'm going to dodge Sue's question for me. Todd forgot to return my stick, so I really can't talk about space. But I'll talk about money instead. Is that okay? This is our second year on campus where the budget for the campus is over $1 billion. The budget for the whole of the CU system now is about 2 1/3, 2.4 billion, something like that, and the Boulder campus is over $1 billion and rising. That $1 billion is divided into two parts, almost evenly. One half is funding that is specific funding and not general funding. Those are research dollars. There are also auxiliary dollars in things like primarily the housing and dining services budget. The other half of that funding is the general fund portion of the budget, which also has in it three significant parts: tuition and fees, state support, and indirect cost recovery funds. In that roughly $500 million of general fund budget, right now we're, well, in fact, I shouldn't even say right now, I should say last year, we were at about $420 million as tuition and fee revenue. Our state revenue now is down to about $50 million, so less than 5% of our entire campus budget. And the ICR portion then is most of what's the rest. There are a few other pennies hanging around from things like interest and other fees. The point of this is that we are essentially a cash-funded institution. We're funded by the services we sell, which is primarily educational services, and that's where the money to operate what we're doing in support of all our missions, both the educational and the research mission, that's where it's coming from. The problem with that is when you have that kind of cash focus to the source of the money, is it puts tremendous pressure on those paying in the money, demanding that they get something directly back out of that money. And it's this is over the years we've moved from a situation where back in the 70s, when we were building lots of buildings and so on and so forth, where we might have had a state component to our funding base that was roughly let's say 20% or maybe even more. And as that has shrunk, it has really induced new pressures on campus. If we turn to the ICR component of that, there's not enough ICR. It's not because you're not doing enough in terms of raising research funds. It's that the problem with ICR is it doesn't cover the bill. Indirect cost recovery is related to indirect costs that are real, that can be measured, that have factual basis. The accountants work on this and measure the costs of operating research. And quite frankly, the way it's done, ICR doesn't pay to cover the costs of supporting what are the indirect costs of research. So for instance, to give you a couple examples of that, another way of talking about ICR is sometimes to call it F&A, the facilities and administrative portions of the ICR percent. And our ICR rate now is in the low 50s somewhere. In that F&A in those facilities and administrative portions of that 50%, the administrative portion is capped by the federal government at a certain level, and we're at that cap in terms of what we can charge. The administrative costs actually attributable to research are in excess of that, and it becomes an automatic funding hole that the campus has to push back in there. A second notion that we have here is that the F&A rate is calculated in a 3-year cycle, and it's in arrears. It's rising, but it's because it's calculated in this 3-year cycle. 1 year is the measurement, second year is the negotiation, or the calculation, the third year is the negotiation, and then it goes into effect. So the F&A rate is actually measuring what costs were some number of years behind, and as costs are increasing, it means that the F&A that we're charging, even the F part of it, even the facilities part of it, is less than what's actually being charged. Third part of that equation is the fact that I said it was negotiated. So we measure our costs, then we enter into a negotiation with the federal government, and we don't get everything that is in our costs. And a final point is that not all of the research that's done is fully charging the indirect cost rate on that research. The point of that discussion is that research is subsidized out of those other parts of the budget that I was talking about. Research is critical to the role and mission and success of this institution. But there has to be recognition of the fact that it is being funded by other parts of our financial structure, and the reality in that financial structure is that in years past, with more state support that was sort of less specific in terms of what was supposed to be happening with that financial support, it was easier in the budget to support research as part of our whole financial structure. Now when I have students clamoring at my door saying, why can't I see a specific amount of spending on me as a business student in terms of the services that are offered for my education, I've got a problem.
Thank you, Bill. So finally, John Stephenson will express his thoughts.
Sue, of course, made predictions about what we would all talk about, and Bill frustrated her to a large degree, and I will frustrate her to some degree. As Mike pointed out, I'm a faculty member in the English department, and that's a body on campus where most of the members think that ICR is that place in the hospital where they put you when you're really, really sick. And so since I came to the graduate school 4 years ago, I've had a lot to learn about the work across campus. And I guess I have a couple of observations to make based on that experience and based on some of the things that I've heard so far today. I think if someone from outside of education, outside of higher education, had been present in the room earlier as we were talking about how some of these very complicated planning decisions are made about how startup packages are negotiated and who pays them, how faculty lines are allocated, an outsider, this sort of putative management expert from Mars would say, you guys are nuts. You guys are absolutely crazy. This is the most inefficient system possible. I guess what I would say is that, yes, it's inefficient, but that inefficiency is part of why we are as good as we are. And I think particularly in the units that we're talking about today, the physical scientists who are present in the room, and those of your colleagues who are not present in the room, that in some ways what are the difficulties that we face in doing the work that we need to do, and I think Bill has outlined those quite well, mean that we have to cooperate in a way. that every decision involves a lot of people. And I think that that means that there's a great deal of consensus behind a great deal of the decisions that we make and the resource allocations that we engage in. I think it's one reason why strategic planning is hard on this campus, because I think strategic planning often does say, okay, we know in advance exactly what we're going to do, and that drives a lot of decisions in a way that doesn't always respond to immediate circumstance. I think that we've evolved procedures on this campus that take into account immediate circumstance very carefully, and I think that's one of our strengths. One of the things I think about a lot in a place like the graduate school is, and this is an underlying theme I think in a lot of what's been said today, is why are we so good? Why is this campus, the Boulder campus, such an excellent university? Why do we compete so well? Why are so many of our departments, particularly the ones under review this year, why are they, if not in the top 10, then very close to the top 10 in the country? And I think it's easy to say, well, we have good luck in our natural location. We have good luck in the fact that Mamie Eisenhower was a Coloradan, and so NIST came here, and we got a bunch of other federal labs, and that makes gives us a kind of infrastructure for doing science that other places wouldn't have. But I think beyond that, we are, I guess I'm not sure if any of the last people are here, but you're a planetary science person for the second, Michael. It's as if we've evolved on this campus like we were life on another planet, a planet different than, say, the planet Earth, where other public institutions of higher education have evolved. We've figured out ways to survive in a harsh climate that give us great strength. And I think we need to understand that we have evolved unique procedures that make us strong. So that's a general observation. I would say in terms of faculty retention, this is something my colleague and friend Jeff Cox and I have talked about a lot over the years. There's a way in which I think sometimes we fetishize retention. I was a department chair for 8 years, and I lost some of my best junior faculty, and it was a heartbreak. And the metaphor of the farm team is I think, all too apt. But I think that there's also a health to be found in the circulation of faculty among institutions, and that if we serve as a farm team for other institutions can serve as our farm team. I think one of the great things about Todd's leadership in the college is he's been much more willing to do hiring at the senior level than some of his predecessors, and I think that that's brought in a number of good people and kept the circulation of ideas and just fresh perspectives as part of our institutional identity. So I'm not saying that retention isn't important. I'm just saying that I think we always need to think through, it's sort of like what Todd was saying earlier about startup packages and how much of that is I love you money, and how much of retention is just trying to show the love and not recognizing fully that a certain kind of circulation is good. The last point I make, and this is where I will bear out Sue's prediction, I think one thing we don't often think about is how graduate education might be considered as part of the package in either a faculty recruitment or a faculty retention issue. I hear constantly from faculty, oh, I'm not getting the graduate students I want, I don't have enough money, I'm losing my prize recruits to other institutions. And I think in terms of how the research work on campus takes place, particularly in the kinds of units that are under review this year, that you can't really separate faculty and graduate students. And I think they need to be made more explicitly part of the equation when we discuss these issues.
Thank you, John. We can open this up for questions, and I will make an observation that I didn't think about the planetary analogy that John gave us here, but when I do look at some of my colleagues, I wonder what planet they're from. And I now know it's not the one I'm from. Yes?
So in the presentations earlier, every unit focused on all the wonderful things they're doing with undergraduate education, 3 different units focused on the same wonderful undergraduate. We heard how tuition and fees, which is mostly undergraduate, it's paying most of the bills to some extent. I heard research, 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 and graduate education. Where does the undergraduate piece come into this, and how are we supporting that part of what we do?
Could I ask the questioners to state who they are?
I'm anonymous. No.
Okay.
Carrie Muir with the math department.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I heard a lot of people bragging about the student credit hour production. That shows that people take it very seriously. Our department does. I think every one of the departments here talked about how efficient they were at delivering quality instruction. The other thing I would add, and I think all our departments do it, is opportunities for research, undergrad research, jobs all the way up to honors theses, and we all do it.
Hi. That's a valid point, and in my discussion of where we get FTE to hire new faculty, something I didn't mention, rightfully, your point well taken, is that clearly new faculty are going to be teaching. And it doesn't matter where they're hired and what through initiative or institute or department, all of the new faculty that we hire are going to be doing teaching. I think I probably didn't mention it because, and I presume this is your point, how those FTE are allocated are really going to be based on research needs. And then what flows from the research needs determines what sorts of educational opportunities those will also bring. And fortunate or not, that's often, I believe that's the way it's going to remain. Now, where this stands out would be something like physics education research, what the mathematics department does, what applied mathematics does, in terms of having, as part of their strategic hiring, education, mathematics education, physics education, to hire someone who does research in education. Still, that's a research area. It has implications for teaching, but I think it's probably going to be difficult, and I would welcome suggestions on how we could actually incorporate teaching at the undergraduate level in developing these strategic hiring areas and allocating FTE. I see that as a big challenge.
Real quick, I started to, my first reaction when you brought up undergraduate education was I thought, oh, I can sit back, I don't have to handle that one. But I think it's important to recognize that one of the real strengths on this campus is the seriousness with which we take our responsibility to train our graduate student teachers. We have a world-class graduate teacher program which does an outstanding job of making sure that the graduate students who handle an enormous part of the undergraduate teaching burden on this campus, as in all of our peer institutions as well, that they are well prepared to do that. I would say that it is, if this entire campus is a tribute to the power of inspired improvisation, that one of the outstanding examples of that is the graduate teacher program. They have run on a wing and a prayer for a long time, and it would be nice to put a few more resources in there, but they have done a great job, and I think it's important to recognize that this campus takes that role, that part of undergraduate teaching, very seriously.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Maggie.
I guess I would just add to that when we do, and I'm sure you do this in your department as well, when we are doing our strategic plans within the department, part of that process is what classes where do we want to go, what classes do we need covered, what new areas do we want to be teaching in. So I guess I would say that's all part of the strategic planning process that leads to that request that goes up. So it's obviously very important. And you saw, I think you saw it from the presentations by the chairs, that undergraduate education is important to each and every one of these departments.
Paul?
Physics is very proud of its undergraduate teaching record. Arts and Sciences thinks we're one of the best teaching departments, in addition to one of the best research departments. We focus on learning. I mean, so there's been a sea change in the way we think about teaching introductory and upper division physics, in that we may want to make sure the students are actually learning what we hope that they would learn when they walked into the class. And we study that a lot, and the physics education research group within our department certainly helped that. But the vast majority of the members of the faculty in physics are not in physics education research, but we take that part of our mission of actually measuring student learning give it a very high importance.
Connie Stephen had the next question.
Thank you. I would like to respond to Paul and Sue in some way about initiatives, because you both raised, and it almost sounded like an initiative is a competition against the existing resources. And I see it quite different. I think it is a chance to actually not increase existing ivory towers, but build blocks between these ivory towers, so we actually have a much higher base. And that is not only the research, that is the teaching. And I can see this as a real first time on this campus. We can talk across disciplines. I just take, for example, the GEO initiative that Jim White might be or is leading. And most likely we need somebody in law to actually team up in such an initiative. We would not work together otherwise. And I see that as an enormous chance to bring units together in the teaching and in the research. And my view of an initiative is not raising towers. It's building between on the ground to actually make a bridge.
Panel response, Mike?
Well, our group of the 3 faculty talked about this in preparation for this. And I think Paul said it well about the institute department issue. It would really be nice if this were not zero sum. So I went back and read the 2030 flagship document. It's maybe getting out of date, maybe not. But it struck me that none of this is going to succeed. We will be at each other's throats for limited resources unless we get more faculty lines. So if you can guarantee, and our provosts and deans can guarantee that this is going to be energy into the system to create more lines, the 50 or 100 new lines that were promised, then maybe we don't have a problem. But if it's zero sum, and maybe for a short term it will be, then we really have to find a way so that we're not at each other's throats competing over a zero sum. I guarantee you, if departments, key areas, and key faculty slowly retire, and we need to hire again, we need to keep our core areas strong. And we are going to be competing, and maybe it's a healthy debate to have, but it would really be nice if we could have someone lead us into the next 5 years with 50 or 100 more FTE.
Sue, I understand your concern about whether there are too many special initiatives, but I would point out that in my time here, 34 years, it has been many of those special initiatives that have really created the foundation which has allowed our university, which was before the NSF Centers of Excellence program, a modest state university, poorly supported in a libertarian tax state, into a world-class institution, arguably, as measured by any objective standard. The one I like, for obvious reasons, is ratios of citations to faculty. And it is some of those initiatives that have carried the day and supported the rising boats theory, which I think have brought all of us along. Space initiative in the 80s, environmental initiative. Now we're having the energy initiative, and I think that will be a successful one. And you can add your own favorites to this. But I think that unless we continue to resist this psychology of entitlement and stress the reward of performance, as we've tried to as administrators and as faculty chairs and faculty members on committees determining what rewards our colleagues ought to get. Unless we do that, we will very quickly slide backwards. I'm concerned in particular against the sort of Christmas tree mentality that I see as we try to engage our CU Foundation to help us raise private funds to get our graduates and our friends of the university to be to share their wealth, show their appreciation for the good education that they got. And everyone has a different Christmas tree ornament that they want. Some people want endowed chairs, hoping that it will bring outstanding faculty to, again, raise the reputation of all of us. Others want more tuition scholarships, hoping that that will make our work easier as we work with brighter and brighter students and also make us look better. But I would maintain that those things are obtainable in different ways than the one that is most important, as I have heard this panel talk and listened to this for years, is the crisis in space. We cannot build buildings without major funding. If we ask some of our friends of the university to donate an endowed chair when they could donate a fraction of a building, we are, in my mind, not making a wise investment, and we're allowing the mentality of entitlement to displace the wisdom that we all know is at the heart of a lot of the conflict on this campus, namely conflicts over space, who gets to be next in line. And I would point out that we have, in my mind, not a very good system to identify and do the traffic copying with the foundation. We don't have a very clear picture of whose prospect people we've cultivated through the years is, whether that person ought to be donating to one building fund or to a scholarship or whatever. And unless we take better charge of that in a very low state support system for buildings, we will be hurt perhaps better than all the quarreling that Mike worried about in a zero-sum game over who gets the next positions. I would maintain that the best solution for who gets the next positions is to think in terms of maintaining the strengths within the departments by joint hires. And that can't always be done, but it has served us very well in the past, and I think it can continue to ensure the strength of our university in the future. So I'd be interested in any comments or rejoinders.
Well, panel.
Sure, let me take a stab at that. So definitely don't misunderstand me. I am not arguing against initiatives. I think in sort of the perspective that you gave of how they have served us over the past is absolutely right on. And I think now the kinds of things we're facing, it's sort of it's a rate issue, as in there seem to be many more things coming forward than have done in the past. They seem to sort of come at one or maybe two over a pretty long period of time. And so we're facing positively in that this means faculty from a lot of different disciplines are coming together to promote a collective undergraduate, graduate education and research focus. So that's, I would never argue against that. My point is that there are limits to the numbers of new things that we might be able to do. And so in deciding kind of which direction to go, I think this connection with the existing institutes that serve that purpose as well, bringing different disciplines together, and the departmental units, it's really important to maintain that connection and communication so that if we have, I don't know what number it is, let's just say 20 new lines. What about that, Stein? If we have 20 new lines, I'm a very optimistic person. Then, you know, yeah, Justin. Then, you know, where do they go? And the ideal model would be that they both can serve needs at departmental, institute, initiative levels that would do good, not harm. And so no one wants it to be a competition. It should be something that's collaborative. But again, my point is that we can't do everything. No one would ever suggest we could do everything. And so it's going to be a challenge for all of us at many levels to try and figure out what the things are that we can do really well, that serve us at all these levels.
Mike?
Yeah.
I wanted to respond to Bob's numerous and thoughtful comments. Thank you for those. First, I think you're right probably about the buildings higher priority than endowed chairs, but I think that points to the real question, who prioritizes? Where do these initiatives come from? Raise your hand in the room if you had anything to do with picking those initiatives. Okay. I saw three administrators. Okay, so the key is, wouldn't it be nice if departments and institutes and faculty were engaged, a small cluster of them, I believe in Republican government, helped prioritize, not only at that level, but also at the level of the department and program review of fellowships and buildings and endowed chairs, et cetera. I just think that we don't have a system that gets the faculty buy-in very well on these top-down initiatives compared to the bottom-up we're doing right now in these strategic planning. I'll defer to Jeff.
To add to what Mike was saying is when we did the review of program review, one of the major objections coming from the faculty actually did focus on the issue of initiatives and the lack of faculty input on, there was not opposition to the idea of initiatives. Everybody understood how important the initiatives were and how much the initiatives had brought to this campus. But that exactly the point Mike was making, which is that there wasn't a feeling as if there was any process that the faculty understood by which these initiatives were decided upon. And that secondly, once those initiatives were put in place, that they weren't put under the same kind of review and budgeting processes that other units on campus are. So I mean, one proposal that came out was, okay, so there are initiatives that arise preferably through a faculty informed process, but let's say there's a aggressive, innovative administrator who latches upon a new initiative and wants to make a go forward. But as soon as that initiative has been decided upon, it should be placed under the purview of a dean, maybe the dean of the graduate school if it doesn't fit within a particular school or college, but that it be put within the normal budgeting process so that we don't have this sense as if there are initiatives that are competing for dollars before anybody else even gets into the conversation. And I think there was a lot of faculty frustration around this issue.
Bill.
I'm going to get a reputation, I think, for numbers. But let me put some numbers. let me, as I already have. Huh? Let me put some numbers on the table. Right now we have 1,100 tenure and tenure track faculty on campus, and in that number, the new faculty positions over the last 5 years, I think, is 92. The way I count them. Now I'll admit, Lou counts them differently than I do. I've been in my job for more than a decade now. One of the first things I learned when I walked in the door is the hardest thing you can do on campus is count faculty. So that's what I'm trying to do here. So we've got about 1,100 faculty by my reckoning, and 92 of those, almost 10% are growth in the last 5 years. And interestingly, until last year and this year, the number of student credit hours produced on campus was reasonably flat. We've had increases in the last 2 years, but what this means is really an enrichment in that old student-faculty ratio number that we hear so much about and people try to measure so much. But another interesting observation I can make is that of those 1,100 faculty, one thing I do with my staff every year is do this nice little, they decided to throw all the colors they can wring out of the printer into this graph that they produce, which arrays the faculty that have been on campus for at least 5 years and at least 7 years in terms of the cumulative salary increase that those faculty have gotten. So I don't want to talk about salary increases, that's too depressing. But in terms of the numbers in those charts, when I measure the number of faculty out of those 1,100 faculty who've been here for 7 years or more, the number is only like 600, 650. Huge turnover in our faculty. The change that we see on this campus, if you're not aware of it, is really surprising. And what that means is I think there's plenty of room for lots of initiatives as we're going through these changes.
In Flagship 2030 is the outreach to the other universities in the area, in particular the federal labs in the area and private sector companies in the area. There's another resource that we have tapped. We can see the GILA building, that was largely federal money, and the campus is a partner. This is the kind of an opportunity that we should be looking more and more for, particularly for capital construction, because we can do things more efficiently and better on our campus than can be done probably in most of the labs that we would be partnering with, because we have access to the graduate student and faculty base here that they don't have there, and we can provide a grouping. GILA is a wonderful example where you have NIST faculty and CU faculty working side by side. Unless you happen to see their paycheck stub, you don't know who pays whom, who is paid by whom, but it's an opportunity that we need to keep pushing on. Capital construction is something the government labs could be very helpful with, and private sector companies that want to invest in the university.
I'm John Stockey in APS. So I've been really blown away by the presentations this afternoon. It's fantastic stuff going on here. I only knew a bit about it. And I think there's a lesson in that we're not listening specifically to, that I want to turn on this question of initiatives very specifically. Initiatives are great in a lot of ways, okay, but there's some things that they address and some things that they don't address. It would be impossible for me, listening to these presentations today, to say that our departments and institutes don't think in terms of interdisciplinary research and don't think strategically. Just incredible stuff going on, initiatives bubbling up in all kinds of places. And yet, what do we see at this university time and time again are these top-down initiatives that only take marginally into account this very strategic work that we have here across disciplines and that we do in and out every day in order to build better and better programs here at the university. But rather than be very nebulous about this, let me just be very specific. Suddenly we heard maybe last year or 2 years ago that there would be this aerospace initiative in which APS was invited to become a member to build some interdisciplinary program between aerospace engineering and astrophysics, because there was some need there. Well, that need didn't seem to come from within our department. There was nothing that suggested that we had such a need, but nevertheless it seemed to have some traction somewhere. It's impossible for us to ignore that in a sense because, gee, faculty lines and resources might be involved, and yet we haven't even heard of this thing, right? And so it comes and it goes and it rises and falls, depending upon the rise and fall of administrators, the arrival or leaving of administrators. And in fact, we get into a situation where we can't make sensible decisions long term because we're driven by very top-down initiatives that are created by administrators for who knows what reason. Maybe it's their resume or maybe it's their ego. Yes, I'm being pointed here about this situation. Let me give you another example. A huge new building has just started to go up nearby on campus. I was told by a fairly high-level administrator recently that he heard about it for the first time when he saw a notice on his car window telling him that he had to move his car to a different lot so this building could be built, okay? So it's not as if that building went through any sort of strategic process. Here we hear about, needing space for university professors, for their offices and for labs. And what happens without any of us knowing anything about it, suddenly there's this huge new student services building that goes up. How in the world can we plan as faculty, as departments, as institutes in some reasonable way when all of that is going to be co-opted by an administrator coming in that wants to do well here for 3 years and then go to Ohio State? Oh, sorry, that was too pointed an example. But you get my drift here. We have to find a way as a group to start resisting this kind of planning process. Because if we don't, we're going to go down. Our initiatives that we develop are not going to be developed. Okay? We need to think how to, press back a little bit against this sort of operation, and we need to do it real soon. Otherwise, as you say, in a constrained budget environment, we're in real trouble.
Well, I'll say a couple things. First, the C4C, the Center for Community, which did seem to rise from the parking lot rather quickly. Actually, it is mentioned in the campus facilities master plan that expired a year ago in July and was initiated 10 years before that. So that building was discussed as early as 96, 97, something like that, in terms of the planning for that specific building. And secondly, something that is not well understood, I did go through the operating budget part of the campus. That's exclusive of the capital side of the budgeting for the campus. That building is not being budgeted out of general funds. It's being budgeted from, or even state funds. It's being budgeted from cash funds services. Basically, the students are paying for that building themselves out of their housing and dining services fees.
I would like to come back to the question of interdisciplinarity in teaching. And my name is Ute Herzfeld. I'm a research faculty at Ceres, and I've been affiliated with this university since 1993 in various roles. I teach through, once upon a time I helped geography out, but through mathematics, applied math, and I advise a number of students in aerospace, various engineering departments, undergraduates in physics and whatnot. So in this time of lack of money, I would like you to consider the following idea. If you want to increase the interdisciplinarity in teaching and bring in new capacities, then maybe one way to do this would be to look at the people you actually have. And the way to do that is if you would include research faculty in teaching and then support their salary in a role, in a model that other universities actually have been using for decades, namely sort of 10% when they start, 50% when they end, then that wouldn't cost you $1 million in bringing in physics professors who go to Ohio or wherever. And because you actually have people who are already here, and then you'd only have to pay, say, 25% of the rate of a whole salary, because after all, the poor researcher has been bringing in his salary, so the university gets rich when he brings some in, and he gets poor when he doesn't bring anything in, and you don't have to pay a full salary. And you'd probably have a higher rate at retention also, because after all, those people have been here for a while, so their sort of gum strings to the university may be a bit higher than for people who just come as juniors, get merit leave, I don't know what they do, find California better. So this would be, and also another thing is, the National Science Foundation doesn't really like senior researchers like myself who want 100% of salary from NSF. They like the university to actually support the research faculty through a certain amount, saying, well, you've been here for decades, you've done this and that, somehow we couldn't get rid of you any other way, maybe you should have 25% or 50% of your salary, and also that would go then directly to teaching interdisciplinary courses, because most of the researchers are in interdisciplinary places. Another line of thought, and I know you shouldn't bring in the AGU sense more than 5 words because people won't listen. Another line of thought is when teaching for a certain department, I find what Connie said there before. The departments are very much into, there's someone else teaching a course, is this taking away from my turf? I taught an interdisciplinary graduate class. I announced it for people from various departments. 10 graduate students came. They were from different departments. What does the chair say? We paid the $6,000 we gave you for this. And the mathematicians are outnumbered by the engineers. Why didn't engineering pay for this? And so we don't want to pay for something where engineering students profit and so forth, not to insult the department. But it seems to be a real problem. I thought we did great. The students really liked it. Out of 10, 6 want me on their committee. But the department chair says, gee, what a loss for my department. We paid $6,000 and it benefited all the others. And it's true. I mean, I've been trying to get this point across for quite a while. So now I'd like some comments, please. Like how this is impossible and costs more than $1 million in startup funds.
Panel response? General issue of research faculty, soft money faculty. This is a group of units that has a fair number of those.
Well, the research faculty in physics teaches part of their normal job. That's part of the expectation. So now, maybe in the research institutes, it's rather different. But people who are in physics and GILA, that's part of our expectation. They're not paid separately on the general fund. It's part of the expectation of being a researcher and being involved in our graduate and undergraduate programs.
So I agree with Paul. In astrophysics, APS, we have 4 research professors, and they're teaching typically one course every 6 semesters. Some we pay as an overload. Some are not allowed to be paid because of various federal lab rules. But I think what you're getting at is a really hard question on the margin. If you have a small number of new lines, if you're a provost or a dean or a department chair, what do you want? How do you want to spend your money? Maybe you could take your money and hire out at $6,000 a course and deliver your instruction. But if what you want is to be a major research university, maybe you really want tenure track lines. And so the balance of that is a tough question. And I don't think there's a simple answer.
It's like a quarter FTE rather than there's $6,000. So do you want to go to either this or that, or do you want a model like UCSD has, like a lot of other universities have, where the research faculty can go university last 50%, where you get a fraction of the FTE to some of the research faculty, and C does not have that at all. That's difficult.
Just a little. It's obviously an issue of there's a pot of money available, and do you use that money, for instance, a part of an FTE, to hire a tenure-track faculty member, or to use it to hire, in your suggestion, a research associate to do some teaching? And I think, which is probably your point, most units have made the decision to use FTE to hire tenure-track faculty rather than to use it in somewhat smaller bits and pieces to hire research faculty. And so it is, in fact, what you would be suggesting is, in fact, kind of a paradigm shift in how FTE are used. So if a faculty member retired, the option of what to do with that money and what to do with that FTE, you're suggesting should be more broad than just hiring additional tenure-track faculty. I think probably the model of hiring tenure-track faculty will persist. That said, I think there are, which you've participated in, not a quarter of an FTE of your salary, but hiring research faculty to teach course by course where it's possible, where we can work that out given what their appointment is. So it's a provocative idea that maybe departments will discuss.
Any other comments from the panel? Our next question, I should say while the microphone's moving over there, I feel really bad that I once got a job offer from Ohio State University. I didn't go.
Hi, my name's Christian Kopf. I'm in the honors program. Like a lot of you, I'd like to talk a little bit about the curriculum, and it might ending up in space. I read Carl Wyman's editorial in the September Science, and I had a kind of Serena moment, except instead of a tennis ball, I was holding a clicker. And it seems to me, my experience in honors exams in sciences that for most of my time here, I'd be the outsider. I'd ask a historical, how does this relate to the history of the field? How does your research work in? And the satisfactoriness of the answer of that kind of question to me tracked what the experts thought the value of the research and the quality of the student was. That hasn't been true for quite some time now. When I ask that kind of question now, kids who are doing incredibly complex, creative, complicated stuff, sometimes publishable and near publishable, can repeat the basis of the need for the research, but they can't connect it to the story of their field. And this seems to me a problem facing the whole liberal arts curriculum, because when I look at the history of science in the modern period and look at the Copernicus and Tycho Brahe and Kepler and Galileo and Newton and Boyle and Linnaeus and Darwin and Max Planck and Werner Heisenberg, these guys had a liberal arts education. That was an education where foreign language and writing was just as important as math. And this was the basis of creativity. And this is where the space thing comes in, because you look now at things like writing and language, and the classrooms are dilapidating. They don't have the facilities they need. There aren't overhead projectors. There are clickers. And instead, we build an Atlas building, which doesn't have many classrooms, but has a coffee bar and a patio. We build the Orwellianly named Center for Community. Right? I mean, you know, we must have been in charge of the ad hoc committee to name that, right? And we heard today, and again, I don't resent anybody's research, but this fantastic 50,000 square feet building, completely for research, not an inch for teaching, although ultimately tuition and the undergraduates, as Bill has pointed out, and there's a lot of research to back it up, are essential both for the operating costs of this university and for filling up the gap created by the need for recovering indirect costs. And I really think there's a need to think about this very seriously. Thank you.
Mike.
Good points, but I think if you look back 20 years, a lot of the buildings that they've built here have dual use. And I know Benson certainly does. Our department uses Benson, physics, geology, et cetera. It's not just research. And I know Gilla quite well, and I know that a lot of those classrooms, or they call them conference rooms, get used for instruction and small group meetings and thinking about things that I would call educational, not just research. And the other comment I wanted to react to, writing, I couldn't agree more. I tell students, speaking and writing are really the keys to a great career. And I'm pleased that in our department and in CASA and in Gilla, there are writing courses taught by research people on how to write better proposals, better papers, better senior theses, better Comps 2 exams. But I couldn't agree more. We could do better. But I think the writing on this campus, judging from undergrad classes I've taught, is improving. It's getting better.
Let me just follow up on Mike's comment there, because I'm, as you know, Chris, very sympathetic to a lot of what you're saying. I think just as they're dual-use buildings, I think it's also important to remember that we, in a sense, as a collective, are a dual-use campus, that we are here to both teach and to do research, and that those things work together in ways that sometimes we can specify very articulately and eloquently, and sometimes there's a numinous connection that exceeds the grasp of articulation, but the fact that they're taking place in the same space does provide an opportunity for them to feed upon each other. I think you have selected some examples for our collective contemplation that are perhaps difficult to answer directly. But I guess I would say that I think that on the faculty of this campus there is a large commitment to the continuing value of a liberal arts education. I don't hear the faculty I talk to across campus in any way diminishing the continued importance of that. I think we have to understand that what constitutes a liberal arts education is itself a matter of evolution. I'm not sure that Copernicus had the same education that Newton did, or that Newton had the same education that Einstein did. What the liberal arts are will always be a matter of contest, but I think as long as we collectively value them, even if we disagree about what constitutes them, I think we'll stay in good shape.
Christian, I think we all remember the old line that a former president of the University of Oklahoma is famous for, and that is that he wanted to have a physics department that the football team could be proud of. But I think that the challenge here in this program review that we're heading off to, and this is related back to some of my initial comments, and I think to what you were just saying, is that I think that these programs need to keep in mind the challenge that their role, their excellence, their research mission does have to return back to what they've done very well for decades, and that is to build this and keep this as a campus that the whole campus community, oh, wrong word, not community, the whole of us guys on the campus, or us.
Watch out, Orwell.
Us, yes, Orwell. can be, can really have a sense of identity and be stimulated by in whatever the pursuit that we're following happens to be.
Any other responses from the panel? I'm going to ask a question before, since you've had one, use my prerogative as the chair here to ask one. One of the issues that Todd brought up while I was coming late, eating my lunch, listening to Todd, is graduate students and graduate student support. And an issue that has been raised in ABAC, Bill's committee, is the question of should there be some sort of proportion between, if there's an additional faculty added, should there be additional TAs that go along with that, and some fraction of staff support and other kinds of support that go along with that. Are we getting out of balance between the addition of faculty FTEs and all the other pieces and parts of the university that are important and that support that faculty, or that enhance or enrich that faculty's opportunity?
That sounds like one for me, Jim.
Start it off. Go ahead.
I'll start it off. I do think that there is a kind of pattern, how can I phrase this, a pattern of asymmetrical growth on this campus that I'm always struck when Bill talks numbers, because he always has such interesting numbers to provide. And the fact of faculty growth that he describes is quite astonishing. And one would hope that in an ideal environment that there would be a kind of symmetrical growth of all the other elements that make up a university along with that growth. But I think we would all agree that largely that kind of faculty growth has been a solitary mesa, not a whole new mountain range that's grown up. And so I think that the graduate support has not grown up with the faculty numbers, and I think that has caused problems. I think it could cause more serious problems in the future for some of the reasons I talked about earlier. The faculty that are here will want to have graduate students to work with of the caliber that they expect, and that the infrastructure of support is not always there for that. Todd has tried to help a lot. We've gotten some help from central administration in terms of the graduate fellowship budget, but overall, I think our stipends, it's interesting. I don't think that our stipends are too low in the sense that we are losing students to our precise peers. It's not that Kansas or Oklahoma is offering them more money and so they go there rather than here. I think that we are losing money to our aspirational peers, or even people to whom we're not yet aspiring to be peers. So that I don't mind it so much when we lose a great graduate student to Stanford, say, because in some ways we can't at all fields compete with Stanford if they're offering more money. I think in some ways where we can move ahead would be to exceed some of our aspirational peers in the offers that we make, because I think we need to demonstrate that not only do we have the faculty and the location, but that we're really willing to make offers that will bring in the best graduate students. I think we are making some progress. I've noticed in the last couple of years, and there are people in this room who are beneficiaries of this, the Chancellor's Fellowship Program, which is the most prestigious, the most lucrative fellowship that we offer in the graduate school. Typically, we would make 8 to 10 offers and get maybe 1 or 0 acceptances, because these offers were going to students who were clearly the best students in their fields, or no matter what the field, across the country, and they were of course being snatched up elsewhere. We've had an extraordinary yield in the last few years, where we're getting 4 and 5 times more Chancellor's Fellowship acceptances than we have in the past. And I think that is a suggestion, a hint there that we are closing the gap. And if we could just, if the budget crisis came, of course, at just the wrong time, as they always do, but I think if we could have gotten some of the additional resources for graduate support this year that were at least in the winds of promise last year, I think we could have closed the gap even further.
Bill, and then Mike, and then Sue.
I actually wrote down an AABAC comment is the very first thing that I wrote on my sheet, and then somehow we passed by that. But let me explain just what the AABAC's feelings were when I asked them, put this question to them last year. The AABAC is the Academic Affairs Budget Advisory Committee. It advises the provost on, most fundamentally, the allocation of new resources into the system. And we've had several $1 million of new resources a year for the last several years, something that's probably slowed down considerably right now. In any event, I put this question to them last year. If you had a $5 million budget of continuing funds to allocate across the campus without regard to where on campus, but how on campus those funds would be used, the answer that they gave me to that question was roughly something like this. About 30% of that money should go into new instructional lines, be it tenure track faculty, or even instructors. About 30% of that money should go into staff positions, staff support, both in traditional academic departments and in support units, such as the libraries or student affairs. And about 30% of that money should go into graduate student development in the form of increased stipends and increased numbers of positions for graduate students. And the remaining 10% should go into general operating support. And I don't think that's how new funds have been allocated on this campus in the last several years. So it was a real pointed kind of message that I got back as to how we should be thinking of that issue.
Mike, and then Sue.
I think I want to answer the question that Jim posed, and I think Todd posed, which is, should we couple TA support, teaching support, as part of the startup package? And of course, an incoming young postdoc or prospective faculty doesn't know how much he or she is going to need a TA. Maybe we need to do a better job educating and making part of it. But our department, in our self-study, and I see some of our grad students here participating in it, has worried a lot about how to get the best grad students. And they seem to want to get right into research. They don't want a TA. They know they should do it down the line. So we're struggling with the right balance of fellowships, RAs, and TAs, and how to get them here first, get them on the hook, and then we instruct them on how important it is to learn to teach and get the TA later. So bottom line, I think RAs and fellowships I would rank more highly up front, and then down the line, the TAs.
Sue.
So just a comment, in this case I'm acting as the conduit of information that I've received from almost all of the natural science departments in my division. When Todd and I visit their faculty meetings in the fall, we have often asked this question about, how graduate resources are always a problem. There aren't enough of them. And we've asked, well, if it's a limited amount of money, what would you rather have? An increase in the stipend that you give to graduate students to attract them here, or more TAs, but at the same stipend rate? And I believe, Todd could back me up on this, they almost unanimously say they want an increase in the rate in the stipend. So I think that indicates that in their views, and I don't have data for this, I'm not sure they do. They probably do, but they may be thinking not necessarily based on hard data, that they are in fact losing graduate students to not always our peers or above, that sometimes to those that are lesser institutions just because of the amount. So it's an interesting problem in trying to take the resources and where do you put them in terms of more TAs to go along with faculty additions, or better TA-ship offers or RA-ship offers to attract better students. And it's an eternal problem.
One model may not fit all.
One model may not fit all, is what Mike said.
Any other comments from the panel?
Yeah.
We have time for one last question. Can you use the microphone?
I'm Sam Scullman. I'm a graduate student in APS, and I just want to echo that I think the biggest place where we're losing out on top incoming grad students is, at least for astronomy, is our private institution competitors who are able to offer huge fellowships where you don't have to do research, you don't have to do TAs, you can just come and do whatever you like and we'll pay you. And I realize that we can't offer that, and we will probably never be able to offer that on a large scale. But we need to come up with some way to attract the top students by a combination of fellowships and our research expertise, and make that clear to them that, yeah, we're not going to just let you sit around because that's not what we want you to do. And I think there's progress that could be made in recruiting the graduate students, the best graduate or incoming graduate students to come here. That would improve the quality of all the departments under review here. And so I would say, don't worry about necessarily increasing individual stipends, but look for attracting top incoming students, because it'll just carry down over years. So that's all I want to say.
We do have time for, oh, I'm sorry, there's panel response.
Comment about staff. So during the Flagship 2030 review, John Kumalot was the co-chair of the staff subcommittee. And there's about 2 staff to every faculty on this campus. Now, if you look around your departments, you'll see that they're not in your departments. They're spread all over the place. Right now, not picking up trash would be one of the jobs. But the most valuable commodity on any Research One university campus is faculty time. And every time a faculty member is doing something that is better and more efficiently done by a member of staff, it's a great efficiency to the institution. So I would advocate that when you're allocating faculty lines, you are explicitly thinking about staff to support those lines close to the faculty, where they will see the immediate benefit of having them nearby.
It's 5 o'clock, and I do want to respect people's time, so a quick one? Go for it.
So all of the issues that I'm hearing about are all based on money. I think that's fair to say, and budget. And the other thing that I heard that I got really depressed to hear from you, Bill, was that actually we're going to get more and more grants, and we're going to lose more and more money. I mean, that doesn't sound too wonderful to me. So, okay, we're not going to make it up by ICR. Okay. We could raise tuition. That will be interesting politically. We could work with the foundation to raise more money. Bob raised some of those concerns about how effective that is. And then the last leg of the stool is to look out at who are those aspirational institutions? Is it UC San Diego? Is it Stanford? Is it Berkeley? Who is it? And what's different between where we are now and where we might want to be? And it really has to do with tech transfer. It really does. That's where those dollars are coming from, and or successful faculty that have come back and donated, and these things have begun to build and build in the endowments. So we're kind of stuck in this place. And so the question is, how could we, if anything, do anything to help facilitate the work that we do so that it would be more attractive to good students to come, because there would be more opportunity for them even beyond their graduate education here in Colorado? What can we do as a university? Anything?
Quick panel response.
I just happen to have here some notes I structured on how to turn bauxite into aluminum. So I think that ought to, be a couple $1 billion in the endowment right there. Tech transfer, actually, that's really a good point, because that is a it's not something for which we see a dollar for dollar flow in some kind of regular basis. So it's rolling the dice, gambling on a big payoff. But I think we have a terrific tech transfer office. I think that we're seeing a lot of possibilities being developed there that will pay off, and that also is probably something that deserves some attention in these reports as they're drawn up. So yeah, that is it's like maybe the academic version of playing the lottery, but there is so much good work that's being done on this campus that it will have its return.
Well, our time is up. Would you please join me in thanking the panel for a lively discussion?